When I first saw the artwork that Ralph McQuarrie had done for Empire, it was an enormous amount of work. All these sequences were completely different from each other, whether it was, the Tauntaun sequence, the Walker sequence, the Cloud City sequence, the asteroid sequence. Every one of them had a different look, and it was a major, major sequence in the film. Far beyond, I thought, than what we'd done in Star Wars, because we were dealing with land-based effects as well as space-based effects, as well as massive fleets of things. And there were a lot of people in the shots, whereas in Star Wars, if you think about it, there weren't many shots of people, but there were a lot in the Walker sequences. It was just huge. We were all worried if we were going to be able to get it done in the time we had. We were working, 6 or 7 days a week for months at the end to get the thing done. One of the shots of Empire Strikes Back is one of the ones that I still am kind of amazed that I managed to figure out. It's led to a lot of other work being done the same way. And it's a scene when you're flying over the ice planet right near the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, and you look down, and there's the Tauntaun running across the ground. Now, that breaks every rule of special effects that should ever be done. George has felt that he likes to just accumulate film and then give it to the effects people, and they can figure out how to do the shot. And that's what he did with this. He showed me this piece of film. He said he wants the Tauntaun in here running along. He didn't care how we did it, but to see if I could do it. And normally, effect scenes, the cameras wouldn't be moving very much. They'd be locked, essentially what we call lock off. There's lots of restraints that you tend to put on effect shots because they're so hard to do. But this is like breaking all the rules. So it's like terrifying and really exciting at the same time. And what we came up with was a way of plotting the motion of the Tauntaun, so every frame at a time, so that we could layer it into that background in optical printing, and it would look like it fit. And it's very hard to explain, because essentially we photographed the Tauntaun going through its motions. And we took that piece of film, and we rephotographed that piece of film in front of a second camera that did the move-in on it. So you're looking at film, photographing a piece of film, and the second piece of film has got essentially all the camera shake from the helicopter, the motion from the helicopter that makes effects so difficult, was put in at the second stage, not when we shot the Tauntaun, but when we rephotographed that piece of film. So it took the burden of having to figure out how to do this complicated shot and put it at 2 different stages instead of 1 stage. First we animated the Tauntaun, then we put it into the other shot. And that idea of breaking up shots into components where the human mind could figure out just this part. Now we can figure out just this part. Now just this part is something that we've been using ever since.
When we found out we were going to do the sequence all in this snow battle, and we had white snow and bright daylight skies, we were petrified, because matting in those days against a bright background is very complicated. The problem with matting a blue screen ship against a white background or a snow background is that the black mat that you use to place your ship into the shot with has to be so dense, so black, that usually the matte lines start to show up tremendously. It actually expands as you make your matte blacker and blacker. So as you get your matte thin enough so there's no matte line, you can start to see through your ships. Luckily, some of the ships are going so fast that they are transparent, but you can't tell it unless I stop the film and point it out to you. And in some cases, the ships are matted incorrectly in front of things they should be behind, and they're brief, fast moments with fast cuts, and you can't normally pick it up. There was a definite feeling amongst everyone here that we wanted to really top ourselves in a big way, given the opportunity to, and obviously the film was just set up for us to attempt to do that. I mean, it was loaded with sequences that were really unique and really would push us to the limit of our expertise at that time and beyond. These sequences weren't cut the same way as Star Wars. They didn't have the black and white footage that George worked with this time. He basically storyboarded the sequences and did a lot of his cutting based on what the background plates were doing. And while they were shooting in Norway and everywhere else and in London, the plates would get sent back and George would start rough cutting and we would start working off of that for the walkers and all of that. I can remember going over to John Berg's house, and in his garage he had the very roughest prototype of what the walkers were going to be. He was actually the guy designing the legs and how they would work, based on something I believe Joe Johnston designed.
There had been some talk at the beginning of the show to do those as motion control, sort of robot walking machines. which seemed pretty screwy to me because they would have weighed, 200 pounds apiece, and I don't think ever would have moved very well. And I guess with my stop motion background, I really pushed to do those things in stop motion because it seemed like it was appropriate for those characters to be a little bit jerky because they were machines. Well, Phil Tippett and John Berg came on up to work on the animation on that and to design the characters and build them. And we shot for weeks and weeks and weeks on that. The snow that you see is baking powder. There were like trap doors in the sets for every frame of film that the people could come up through a hole in the set and animate for one frame and then close the trap door back up and we'd shoot a frame of film. It was really neat getting back there and doing that stuff like the way King Kong was done. Part of the idea behind the slowness that they moved was that they could be overpowered and they would lose. And that was part of George's vision on it. They were big, lumbering, obsolete machines that could be overcome by a clever person in the right spot with the right weapon. And I don't know, I think we may have talked about it being, an analogy to Vietnam on that with the size of the equipment, and you could wipe it out if you know where to run and escape from it.
During the walker sequence, the snow walkers, the battle with the snow speeders and all of that going on, I did a lot of shots with the speeders themselves flying around. And we gave the look of the flying a little bit different quality compared to the X-Wings or the TIE ships. They looked like hovercraft, and they had those mechanical flaps that would rise and lower as it would do its turns, and we tried to use those to imply it was actually creating the reason why it would go into a bank or a maneuver around a walker. So once Phil and John and Dennis and everyone were getting the backgrounds with the animated snow walkers in them, I could take that material and start shooting the snow speeders to go into that. And then once that was roughed in, then they would start putting the laser blasts in there. And every once in a while, if the snow walker had a pop or a jerk in the animation, instead of redoing the shot, they would have a laser blast hit it in the leg or wherever and make it look like it was injured or had something give it a shot. So that was very time-saving. The snow, I believe, was made out of something they call micro balloons, which is very small, like silica or glass or something. And that we used for a while. We felt it might be a little too dangerous, so we went to baking soda, which wasn't quite as bad. There was only one scale on the snow speeders. The walkers, there were several scales. One for the animators, which was about 1.5 feet tall. And there was a very large one, about 4.5 feet tall, that was used for the high-speed explosions. And a couple of shots I did where you're flying towards them, point of view from a snow speeder as you race towards its head. And it's doing a little move, so I would do the stop motion on that as his head moved. The background would be a large painting by probably Michael Pangrazio of blue sky and clouds, whatever would match the surrounding footage. Again, there was a lot of different techniques to the whole sequence. There's a large-scale leg piece that was used that was 2 feet in diameter for the scene where it almost steps on Luke as he's getting out of his snow speeder. So there was a large-scale snow speeder and a big foot set in the baking soda, and that would come down and crush this model. And then they used a portion of the plate where Mark runs away from his snow speeder, or nothing was in the shot. He would just run away in a snowbank and then mat that over it. A lot of animation effects of laser blasts and smoke and a lot of craziness. We were trying a lot of new techniques, trying to blend in the ships into the backgrounds better than they had been before, and using different percentages of how much the ship was printed into the scene. So instead of 100% the ship being there way too clear, we would print it in some of the backgrounds where it was kind of an indistinct gray cloud scene, maybe at about 70% or 60% to give you the sense of an aerial haze, an atmosphere in front of the ship. We tried diffusing some of the ships a little bit to soften the edges, and that helped too. Again, a lot of the lighting had to match everything that was going on the background plate, so whatever that looked like, we had to match on what our ships were doing. There's a shot, snow speeders flying over the snow. I think you're introducing them in the sequence, and you're going across a landscape of snow, and then one snow speeder comes in, and another, and another, and another, flaps working. That was all blue screen models, shot motion control. And then the shadows were animated in by the animation department here, basically all cartoon animation. So it gives you the sense they're a certain distance above the ground. And any layering of tricks like that to make you believe the models are in the shot, it helps. And it was tough finding some of those opportunities with just these blank snow backgrounds to help blend in models. So if you could have a ship go behind a snow speeder or behind a hill, as it gets close to an object, cast a shadow on it, anything that makes you believe it's actually in the shot and not shot all these separate pieces like a jigsaw puzzle and pieced together later. That's what we're after. Leading to Dagobah, the ship always flying from point A to point B, I usually was the one who wound up doing those shots. R2-D2 in Empire Strikes Back, when you cut to him in space on the back of the X-Wing, he doesn't have blue on him anymore, he's black. It was the only way to make the shot work, so R2-D2 isn't quite R2-D2 in those shots. And I know George had this real thing about that. We had to work extra hard on Jedi to make the painted blue sections on R2-D2 read as blue. There's so much going on in the asteroid sequence that I deliberately shot a potato to put in those shots to see if anyone would ever know it was a potato. And luckily it got by George and Daly, so we went ahead and stuck it in some of the shots. And so if you look closely out there, you might see a potato flying by camera. Also, what I was doing was just trying to play around with visually what can an audience perceive in a situation like this. This was my own education. I wanted to know what I could get away with. And so some of the shots, I think they're the point of views looking out through the cockpit past Han and everybody as they're staring straight ahead. Some of those asteroids are potatoes. The asteroid sequence is actually probably the most complicated sequence. There's so many different pieces, so many separate elements in them. Not just you have a Millennium Falcon element with all of its rocket passes. You have the TIE ships with all of their rocket passes, and there's usually more than one of them, which makes it more complicated. And you have all these asteroids, which were models made out of some kind of plaster or something. They were styrofoam blocks with this built up on them. And a lot of them were shot separately, not bunched together. We started bunching them together later as we went along because we were running out of time. And so you had a huge model in the background for some of the shots. I'm specifically thinking of one shot I did where the Millennium Falcon races up at the start of one of the sequences, and it does this barrel roll, just missing an asteroid as it comes by camera, and it dives down towards the large asteroid where it's trying to find escape from the TIE ships and all the bad guys. And there's just millions of rocks and planets and star fields and ships. And I just hope on this transfer you can't see any of the garbage mats, because on some of the earlier ones, what we also need to do is when you shoot your spaceship and you have all your blue screen around it, well, you only put the blue around the parts that are necessary around the ship, just barely covering it. Because the bigger the area of the blue screen, the more spill problems you have. It hits the ship and it becomes transparent when you try to mat it against the background. So what we do is we create garbage mats, which is essentially shot in the animation department, and it's usually a square that blocks out all the peripheral nonsense like lights and sentry stands and flags that you don't want anyone to see in the shot. And so it isolates the ship from all the minutia in there that you're using to light it and shoot it. And some of the transfers I've seen, you can actually see these square boxes surrounding the ships and popping around as they're trying to hide all of our lights. And that's quite disconcerting. So hopefully you won't see them here. Again, there was a lot of pieces. Some of the backgrounds of the asteroids had a large asteroid box, we called it, which were all these styrofoam asteroids on wires that were rigged to turn slightly. And there must have been 100 of them in this thing. And that was shot for the distant background behind all the other action that was taking place. Once the X-Wing has crashed in Dagobah, then I did some scenes where when Luke is starting to get his powers, he's running around the swampland, first of all, and these strange sort of prehistoric-looking pterodactyl birds fly around. I did the shots of those puppets flying around and did the stop motion on those. Essentially, it was one puppet that Phil Tippett had made out of wire and rubber, and we put it in the same rough situation as a spaceship would have into these blue pylons mounted into it against a blue screen. I did a basic program of its move, but then I would go in every frame and animate its wings and tail and head. And then we printed it several times and did several versions of it and then put it in the shot more than once. So like there's 2 or 3 of these things flying around. And at the end of the sequence where Luke is getting his powers, 1 or 2 of the shots at the very end, or a few that I did where the X-Wing is, again, shot against blue screen. We hung some little miniature gobbledygook-like swamp vines and grasses and things on the X-Wing and shot it so it had the action that implied that it was hovering over this sort of swampy fog enshrouded pond, and then there's one wide shot where it's part pond, part matte painting that Ralph McQuarrie did. This model and matted in Luke and R2-D2 and I think Yoda at the time. I think Yoda's in that shot.
Luke being trained by Ben, only I had killed Ben off. So now I had to come up with another Jedi who was older and wiser and shorter than Ben to train Luke. That was the beginning premise of Yoda, and I decided I wanted something very small and very unassuming and very wizened and old and that sort of thing. And so I worked with Joe Johnston, who was my chief designer at that point, along with Ralph McQuarrie. I actually gave them both the assignment. I said, I want a 3-foot-high, wizened little gnome-like creature. And they started drawing various pictures of it as I was writing it. And I would say, I want this one, I don't want this one, make him taller. There's a whole series of drawings of the way he's evolved into what he actually is today. But the essence of the fact that he was this super master teacher, sort of the ultimate Ben Kenobi, stayed there. And I knew that I wanted something very old and very unassuming. I think we have green versions and blue versions and all different kinds of versions of him before I finally picked and evolved the version that we've got now. One of the challenges was I was trying to replace Alec Guinness. So in the strength and the power that he brought to Ben Kenobi, which was what I was after the same idea, we then tried to transfer into a puppet. I was using Alec and the Ben Kenobi character as the chief influence. So I want something like this, the same power and the same strength. When he would sit in the calm and the way he did his performance, I want to transfer that into this puppet in the same way. And so all the effort was focused into making him as wise, and you'd use a lot of techniques that one learns in design and I guess psychology. There's a very conscious design element of making his head slightly larger, like a baby, because babies' heads are usually larger than their bodies, and in proportion of the way you grow up, and it's much more attractive. I'm not exactly sure that's why people like babies so much, but it's definitely a physical characteristic that changes as you get older, and we put that onto him, and we made him basically an 800-year-old baby, and then still tried to keep him cute, but tried to give him a very odd look but wouldn't be put offish.
Well, the beginning of Yoda for me was through Jim Henson. We were shooting the Muppet movie in Los Angeles, and Gary Kurtz, producer of Empire Strikes Back, I believe, as Jim told me, approached Jim, asked how to do this, and Jim suggested me. And I remember Jim kind of took me in the trailer and talked to me about this, and he showed me this design, the sketch of Yoda. And sometimes you have to work hard for a character, really find the character, and sometimes it just happens, and I just looked at that and just it felt really right, just felt really good.
To create the hologram of the Emperor, we shot a person in makeup with his eye sockets blacked out. For some reason, George wanted to put some different, stranger eyes in the Emperor, and we wound up shooting a chimpanzee and then match moving the eyes into the Emperor. And then that was again rephotographed off of a television screen to give it the look of the hologram. And that was true of all the hologram shots in there. They were images photographed on film and then rephotographed off of basically a television screen and matted into a shot, sometimes with added animation effects to give the impression of a beam of light showing this image out onto whatever area they were in.
Whenever you have a teacher in a movie, they have a tendency to carry more weight than the hero does in terms of changing people's lives, because they're usually espousing philosophy of one point or another, which to a lot of people is the first time they've come in contact with it. So it's taking old truths and reiterating them and people discovering them for the first time. I don't think it's that profound, but it wasn't surprising to me. The surprising thing to me was that we actually, I think, were able to pull off, and it's mainly due to Frank, the reality of Yoda, that it is a puppet, but he became a very substantial character with a real presence and a reality. You very quickly forget that he's just a puppet. On
Empire, I shot a lot of gag footage. I don't know why. I kept doing stupid things, and usually it was in the slate or before the slate would happen or something like that. And I built my own space slug. That's right, the space slug. So I built my own out of an old sock and made a terrible, stupid-looking puppet. So there's a shot looking down that's in the movie where you're looking at the surface of the asteroid and there's a couple of tie ships above it. In fact, I think one is the design that's actually Darth's design tie ship, and it's flying overhead and you're looking straight down, and there's they're dropping some explosives and you can see them blowing up on the surface. What's not in there is the very last moment when you get to the last crater, this gigantic, stupid sock puppet comes out and attacks one of the ships. But anyway, it kept us, we were on the night shift, see, so we spent 9 months, 6 nights a week on Empire Strikes Back.
Well, the essential part of Yoda was that I felt it was critical that I get the very best actor to play the part, the very best puppeteer to do it, because obviously I was trying to make this into a real character, as a key character in the whole series. So I went to Jim Henson, who I knew, who as far as I was concerned was the very best puppeteer. He was extremely busy working on another project, but his sort of a co-puppeteer and significant player in the Henson organization was Frank Oz. And he recommended that Frank do it, talked to Frank, and he was interested. And so we started working with Frank early on. We had the designs, the sketches of the puppet, and we were starting to begin to get ready to build the puppet. So then he came in as soon as we started to build, and he helped technically evolve the puppet to a way where he could really act with it in, in a very facile sort of way. But he created the voice, and it's his voice. I had, in the various versions of the screenplay, developed the dialogue, the way he spoke, the cadence and the sort of reverse speak that he has, to make him, again, different but still understandable. That all evolved, and we constantly were working with changing things to get little touches in the way he would communicate a particular sentence. But the key to Yoda is that there's a hugely talented actor behind him.
I tried for some otherworldly feeling in the swamp scenes on Dagobah. I was trying to really find something that we'd never seen before. The set decorators kept covering things with leaves and vines, which are very worldly, earth-like, because of the problems of generating each and every little item from scratch. They had such a large space to decorate the swamp area. And they did a very good job on it. I thought it looked pretty otherworldly in the film. I understood their problems. I had these large, spidery-looking tree roots. The floor of the swamp was largely covered with a sort of matting of vines, which laid very white, pale things, which laid along the ground. It kind of blended in with a lot of mushroom-looking things. And there weren't any leaves and vines at all. There were sort of vine-like things in the sense that some of these root-like forms had vine-like look to them. I put some in the foreground of some of this,
Well, the philosophy of put your all into something and don't just try, but actually, envision yourself doing it and accomplishing it is a philosophy that has gone through all of my movies. It is something that I encountered, I think, first when I was in college. A lot of the students would give up on things before they really had a chance to explore them. They would convince themselves that it was not possible. For me, it was the whole issue of just getting to make movies. It was a completely impossible idea. There was no even remote consideration that it could actually happen. But I put my mind to it and never considered any other possibility. And it was through that eventually I did manage to do the impossible. I think it's only by considering the impossible that one can get to it. And you can't get to it by simply saying, I'm going to try to get to it. You simply have to say, I'm going to get to it. I didn't want Yoda to sound like Miss Piggy. And there is a touch of similarity between the two voices. It's a completely different style, but it's the same voice, no matter how you get around it. And so I was a little concerned about that, and I wanted to use a different actor. But I've discovered over the years that, especially in terms of puppetry and that sort of thing, the person that's actually acting the role is really into it and they really can give a performance. And it's very hard for anybody else to duplicate that performance because it's like relooping an actor. It has the same effect. So it wasn't really a matter of being used to the voice. It was really a matter of I couldn't find another actor who could perform it as well as Frank could. And the same thing happened to Tony Daniels playing 3PO.
Cloud City approach with the Millennium Falcon flying towards it. We used a lot of background plates that Brian Johnson shot, sunset cloud pieces that we would put in the Millennium Falcon, so it would look like as if it was flying behind and in front of some of the cloud shapes. And we did some tricks where we would bring the ship up, just dissolve it on to the background to give the impression it was coming out of clouds and flying towards camera. It's joined by these strange orange ships that the people in Cloud City fly. And again, it's probably a model those are relatively small models, about 1.5 feet wide, and the pods on them were probably only 1 foot long. And because of the soft lighting in Cloud City, we wound up having to shoot multiple passes, even on our color light passes, to get the soft light effect. Again, at that time, the problem was difficult to light with soft light, not have it get onto the blue screen and corrupt the blue screen matting effect. So I would shoot blue screen with a silhouette of a ship, then I would back the camera and the film up, and then I would shoot all the lighting against black so I could light it soft and get a nicer look to it. Oh, for digital compositing then, it would have been so easy. As you get in closer to Cloud City, then there's a great Michael Pangrazio painting where you see Princess Leia up in a window, and I did a ship flying around some of the buildings and going by her. Beautiful painting. And landing in Cloud City, oh, that's right. For most of Empire, I was using the smaller, lightweight version of the Millennium Falcon, but as the Millennium Falcon lands on the platform in front of Cloud City, we went back to this gigantic, very heavy version of the Millennium Falcon, which was the only one used on the first film. And it was just a chore to shoot the simplest thing with it because it is so heavy, made out of plywood and huge metal connectors and joints, and it's just this massive thing. And every time you want to move it 2 feet, you have to have a forklift and 20 guys moving around. Plus, you don't want to break it. So you're trying to treat it with as tenderly as you possibly can. And it was shot against blue screen, of course. But in this case, we had part of the platform built miniature that it landed on, so you could see it physically touching down onto the surface of this thing. And John Van Vliet did some animation of little retro rockets going off, so it looked like it was using that to try and hover for a moment and help ease itself down onto the surface of this piece. So it was the platform and the ship were shot together, and then the background was a painting that was put in later that Ralph did.
The biography, kind of, for me, I wrote for Yoda. It was about several pages, and it was only for me, not for the audience. It had a lot of specifics about what he liked to eat and how old he was, what he missed and things like that. But the thing that hits me most is I think he came from a more formal time. Because here he lives in Dagobah, this planet, by himself. And I'm sure he had many friends. This guy's probably 800 years old. And somehow he wound up here because of the troubles all around the universe. I mean, it sounds silly getting this, but as an actor, it's important to know. I do remember that I felt strongly that he was very wise, and he came from another time, a more formal time, and this wasn't his time. This was not his world. It just wasn't. The other world he came from was a gentler world.
Trying to come up with a futuristic city for Empire Strikes Back, the floating city. I came up with round tubular buildings that had domes on the top, because if I made square buildings, they look just like the Black Tower at Universal Studio. You know, I mean, that's a square building, you know, with nice, shiny black sides. It could be white. It could be any color. It doesn't matter. It's square. It's a Universal Studio block, you know. If you make it round, it's the tower for the record company there in Hollywood. You try to imagine a shape for a building that hasn't been already done. It's pretty hard to do. Triangular, pyramidal, cylindrical. You put all those forms together and you give them organic sweeping shapes. That's Corbusier, you know, architect. What seems to be different enough from the average city street in the world that we know, which is mostly square buildings. So I made them round, you know, mostly round, some sort of organic. There was a wonderful old Saturday morning serial with Gene Autry. It was kind of a science fiction thing where Gene had his radio ranch, and he would ride off into the Arizona landscape, and there'd be a trap door in the side of the cliff would open, and out would ride all these guys with buckets on their head, and they were supposed to be some outer space guys, you know, with capes. Gene made his way into their cave, and he found inside there this great otherworldly city that looked just like the one I did. It was done back in 1935. Cylindrical buildings, you know, with round tops. Different guy, but another designer who was presented with the same problem I was the one that did the Emerald City for The Wizard of Oz. And he came up with the same cylindrical buildings with the round tops, so he made them green. You know, it's the Emerald City. So we all came up with the same thing. We were all faced with the same problem. A city that doesn't look like an Earth city, but still looks like a city that you can recognize.
At the end of Empire, there's the scene, and it's called the hospital ship, and Luke is getting repaired because he's had his battle with Darth and lost his hand. Now he gets the mechanical hand, and everyone is together once again, and you see a whole fleet of ships flying away. And we did a lot of blue screen ships, very complicated, strange-shaped ships that had to be lit very specifically. A lot of work went into it, and we were done with the movie. It was terrific. And we got a cut of the movie, and we went into San Francisco, had a big wrap party. It was great. We saw the movie, and it was exciting in our work. We were very proud of all the work everyone had done and put so many long hours into. And I was delighted. I was so happy to have been a part of it. And the film was about to come out. Great. I left on vacation, and I went to visit my folks down in L.A., and I get a phone call, and Patty Blau at ILM was telling me George wants to add some more shots. And I said, that's funny. That's a good joke. It wasn't a joke. I wound up meeting Joe Johnston at what was called the Egg Company in L.A., which was part of Lucasfilm at that time, with George, and designing new shots. The film is coming out in like 3 weeks. The film, we've already seen a cut of the movie, a print of the film, and the wrap party's taken place, and we're doing more shots for the movie. And they wound up doing like 2 or 3 more shots just for the end of the film to take a little longer in wrapping it up. So you just never know. You can never let your guard down for a minute on these films because anything can happen.